So ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to show you exactly how we run our lead gen agency Eclipta at 80% profit margin and the mistakes and pitfalls that most service businesses and agencies specifically are falling into nowadays as to why they have tremendously low profit margins that don't even make it worth it to scale their agency in the first place, because most of what they're generating goes straight back out the door for expenses. And I'm going to show you all the calculations, the tactics, and the simple solutions that we have implemented to go from 40 to 80% within a few days while still seeing exceptional results and even better results for ourselves and our clients. Now, this works for you if you're specifically a B2B service business doing around 20 to 100K a month in revenue. Anything below that revenue mark, you first have to focus on getting the fundamentals right. So you're sitting at around 10 to 20K per month. And it doesn't matter if you're in lead gen, marketing, recruiting, development, or coaching, consultancy. Doesn't matter, because the frameworks still hold true and the typical agency model still applies to you that most people have followed from the very beginning. And what they all have in common is that most of the time they're stuck at a low margin, whether that's 30 to 40%. That was, for example, in my case, the case, but can also be lower, can be higher, but somewhere around that range, no matter how hard you optimize to increase it. And every new client with this model most of the time means you have to hire new people, because a lot of times founders are first of all focusing on sales, and the moment that sales is working and they start acquiring new customers, they now have to focus on delivery, because of course they don't want to burn anyone. They want to uphold the quality. However, that means that they have to push away from sales, which means sales goes down, quality of delivery goes higher, and then at some point it switches again. So it never becomes something predictable. So what the typical agency model then tells you is that you just have to start hiring for those roles in order to fix that issue of not having both qualities at the same time. So that means the more you acquire new clients, the more you have to hire, which means eventually you are the delivery bottleneck, because you have that mindset of okay, every new client equals a new hire. But that can't be it, and that must not be it, and it doesn't have to be like that. Because eventually, if you're always following that path, what you will see is that revenue might grow by acquiring new clients, but eventually your profit doesn't. Your profit decreases. Your profit goes down the more you scale, which just makes it unworthy of actually putting in the time to scale it in the first place. Because eventually, even though your numbers grow on paper, the thing that actually lands and stays in your bank account gets smaller and smaller in a percentage compared to the entire thing that you're doing. And the entire thesis that we're building this on is that you're not behind because you don't use AI. You are behind because you use AI in your business at points where it doesn't even have the biggest effect, because it doesn't know your business. It can't assist you in the things that eat most of your profit margin right now, which is what I'm going to show you exactly in this video today. Now, quickly about me, I've founded 4 different companies in the last 4 years, and a few of them have been lead gen agencies that have scaled up. And you can see that I have figured out the lead gen game, because in the beginning it was always, okay, the focus should be on helping people book more appointments. We were booking 200 plus calls per month for our own agency, and at the same time delivered exceptional results for ourselves. Now, how is that possible? Because if you look at it, that is exactly the pitfall that most people fall into, that they can only either have this or this, but not at the same time. However, we have done these results at the same time with hundreds of replies that we had to manage for our clients, hundreds of calls that we had to take with potential new clients, and then eventually at the same time still hitting days like this, and then still off of 6,000 euros making 4.8k profit, off of 10,000 euros in a day making 8k profit. Same thing with 3.7k making 80% profit, and so on and so forth. So how is it possible that we juggle all these 3 things: delivery, appointment booking and taking, and then eventually the sales side of things, all at the same time, without decreasing the quality of anything in between? And I'm going to show you exactly that in today's video, so you can eventually go ahead and replicate that for your own agency, or at least know where your problems currently lie as to why you're not yet at that point. Now, to understand what the problems actually are, we have to look at the actual model that most people are running right now, because we've got two different ones, and I'm going to start with the typical agency model. Now, that is where most people are at, and by the way, those calculations that you'll see, those are more applicable to where our numbers were, and I'm going to show you exactly how to calculate it yourself. Now, with that being said, let's take the typical agency model. Let's say revenue at 50K a month, which is already a little bit above the average, because most people rarely get to 50K, exactly due to that reason, because they're sitting at 20, 30, 40K, and then most of it goes back out again, which means there's not really a lot that stays to also reinvest again, because most of it is already lost due to the stuff that they even need in the first place to generate that revenue. Now, anyways, we've got multiple factors that we have to take a look at. Number one, we've got delivery and team, because the typical agency model has a model that is also called contractor arbitrage, which means that especially when you're starting out, you don't want to have expenses on a monthly basis. So what that model does perfectly is it offers beginners a way to have exceptional talent in your agency without having to spend money up front, which means you're only spending money if you're making money, which again is great for the beginning, but is an absolute margin killer for scaling. Because, for example, in my case, we always have the standard of hiring A players for our agency. And we also, by the way, we have a team right now. So that's not it. I'm not saying, okay, look, don't hire anyone, but you have to be very selective of how you hire them. Otherwise, it's going to kill your profit margin. With that being said, at that time when I was running my typical agency model, I had two contractors. I had two different services in the beginning called email, LinkedIn, inbound. Before that, I had advertising, social media marketing for coaches, consultants, agencies, and so on. Now, think about it. I had two A players that have both generated millions and millions of dollars for the industry that I was working with. So with that being said, they were located in Germany, in England, in Canada, which means both are, or all three are countries that are quite high price when it comes to salaries, which means if I want to do contract basis for them, I had to do 30 to 60% when it comes to each project that I had to give away, 30% per contractor approximately. And then of course I had projects where it was a little bit less, because for example, I only needed one of them, and then there were projects where I needed both. So anywhere between 40 to 60% I immediately spent on the delivery team. Now, account management kind of goes hand in hand with that, which means it falls under the same thing. Ops, admin, QA is basically the systems that you need to run your business. So basically to get the payments, to the communication, to manage your CRMs, and so on and so forth. And then you've got the tools and software per project that are basically going into management, which for us was always at around 5 to 10%. So let's say 10K product, 500 to 1,000 euros in tool costs. Again, a few hundred for ops, admin, and QA, and then eventually most of it went out for the delivery team. Now, looking at the typical agency model, that is how it should be. Then most of your profit goes out to an A-player team, which is okay, which is fine, but the problem is that with this model, it is always thought that scaling means people, which is exactly the thesis that we talked about before, that every new client needs new hires, because how else are you supposed to scale this up? Now, how you can calculate that yourself, by the way, we were sitting at around 30 to maximum 50% profit margin, if even that, which is just not good. Looking at it from my current perspective, it's tremendous, it's terrible, because if you really look at it, it just means that, let's say we take 30% profit margin, let's actually calculate it. Let's say we close only 10K products. A 10K product is okay, pardon my writing, it's not the best, but anyways, but you'll get the point. A 10K product is a 3-month project, which means, let's say we close 10K products. Now, on paper, we have just done 100,000 in revenue. Cool, we've just hit 6 figures. Let's actually do the math. 100K, that is for 3 months worth of projects and 10 of them. Now, if we look at the profit margin, we have 30% profit margin, which means there's only 30K profit. Which means, in other words, if you're making 100K in revenue, if you're closing 100K in revenue with this model, it means that theoretically in 3 months, you're now sitting broken down at 10K a month in profit, which means you first have to make 10 or 100K in revenue to make 10K a month in profit when you have these 3 months projects. So if we look at that math, it just already doesn't make sense, because having to do 6 figures in order to actually hit 5 figures per month is terrible. I mean, look at the math, it just makes it so difficult. Now, if you break it down as to why that is, it's just because, again, the model gets it backwards. Because here, the number one thing where profit goes to is the delivery team and account management. And the secondary thing are tools and software. However, tools and software is exactly what flips the frame, which gets you away from those 30 to 50% margin. By the way, how to calculate that, just look at, okay, if you'd be making 10K a month, how much goes out to delivery team, how much goes out to tools and so on. You'll get the drill, right? I mean, calculating profit margin is not that hard. But if we now take a look at the counterpart, we've got the infrastructure agency model. Now, here's same thing here, revenue 50K a month, let's say. You can already see that eventually the tools and software, they are not even that different. And it's very easy to understand as to why that is. Because eventually, if you're running the infrastructure agency model, that means that you are building infrastructure yourself. Because you're no longer spending on tools and software. You're now spending on AI and systems. Now, what is the difference? Tools and softwares are third-party tools. Let's say, for example, you're running cold email, it's instantly, it's Bouncer, it's Smart Lead, whatever you want to do, right? Now, that is tools and software that you are using and then eventually working on. However, infrastructure and AI and systems means that you have an operator level AI system that can handle stuff for you, which also allows you, and that is the very important part here, and you can therefore see tools and sending infra is 4%. Why is it that low? Because with this part, we can build our own software. And that is this whole infrastructure model. You can build what you need, and that very easily. You don't need too much tech experience. You don't need to code. I have no idea how to code. I'll be super transparent about that. I have no idea. And I'm also not interested in learning that, or I mean, I would like to learn it, but technically I don't need it, because the infrastructure and the AI operators that we got basically right now available that we can engage with, they are so easy to understand that you can easily build infrastructure yourself with your knowledge to replace your tech stack. Which means that now, approximately out of a 10K product, there's approximately 1K going out for token costs, for system costs, and so on, to rebuild infrastructure that is exactly fitted to our needs. Then we've got focused senior times, and again, that's what I said before, we've got a team. Right, we've got a small team, which means, okay, what goes to who? Who actually needs to be sitting on projects? And then there are sometimes projects where we're just saying, look, we don't need anyone in this because our systems can take care of everything. And that means that, for example, this instead of 5% sits at 10%, but this instead of 10% maybe sits at 5%, because me or my co-founder, Silas Riedel, is sitting at it, but we don't really have to manage it, which means basically in employee costs, it costs us 5%, a few $100, right, for the time we're investing into it. Which therefore means we've now got tools and sending infra. For example, in our case, we have built everything ourselves, which means that this can be slightly higher. This might be sitting at 10 to 15%. So let's say out of a 10K product, that's approximately 1 to 1.5K, because we're just kind of like burning millions and millions and hundreds of millions of tokens. But therefore this sometimes even falls out, but let's say it stays in. We've got 10%, we've got 5%, we've got 4% here, which puts us at 80% margin. And it is quite straightforward to understand, and this is the mindset shift that I've talked about, which is not that yeah, you have to be disciplined, you have to be motivated, because if you think about it, that mindset gets you to work on the typical agency model. Work harder, put in the hours. Cool. And now you're focusing on, okay, how can I put in more hours, but not how can I build better systems so I don't have to put in all these hours? Because what the thesis is of the infrastructure agency model is not that scaling is more people, scaling equals more people, but scaling equals infrastructure. The more you scale, the more infrastructure we need. We don't need more people, we need more infrastructure. We need more centralized systems that knows our agency so well that we can now go ahead and automate every single process that is being added to the process, every single project that's being added to the catalog by scaling it up, by acquiring more people, which allows us to just always stay in the upper end of the margin, because we're always focusing on, okay, how can we use our systems in a way where only by few percentages it goes up, that like basically the expenses that goes out when we scale our agency, which is why this is eventually causing us to be sitting here, and this is causing you to be sitting here. And again, calculate your own profit margins, and then on the counterpart, try to imagine, okay, what is our profit margin like if we would do all of that through infrastructure and AI systems, which, by the way, it might still be a little bit hard to understand, okay, what actually means infrastructure. And I'm going to show you that right now, step by step, exactly what I mean with that and exactly what we're doing internally to figure this out. And also, again, and here's exactly what I've been talking about before. The problem with the typical agency model is that people hours scale linearly with clients, which means the more clients you get, the more hours you have to put in, the more your payroll increases. So with that being said, the way to fix that is exactly what we have talked about, which is that infrastructure has no marginal cost per client, because you build it once and then you scale it proportionally without having to increase your cost tremendously. Which means is that margin is not a cost problem. It's a focus and mindset problem of what you perceive to be true on how you should scale your service business. Now, once you flip the frame from scaling equals people to scaling equals infrastructure, you start focusing on the right things, which is basically this right here. And you start understanding that if you want higher margin, you need better systems to generate better results for yourself, for your clients, while costing you a lot less. And that is exactly the point. Now, how we're doing that is a simple 4-step process. And that is also what is being referred to right here. It's a knowledge transfer problem. The problem with most agencies is that the knowledge always relies on people. It always lives in people. Because let's say, for example, this one right here, this is a business, right? A business has employees. Now these employees, okay, this looks very interesting. Every employee has knowledge, K for knowledge eventually. Now the thing here is that every employee holds knowledge. Let's say you've got 5 in your team right now, which means you've got 5 people that have knowledge. Now let's talk about it. A company might have multiple departments: sales, marketing, operations. So let's take a look at that. The typical agency model means that since every single person has their knowledge and you've got multiple one of these, sales, marketing, and operations always stay separated departments. They don't engage with each other because they have the same processes, they have the same SOPs, the same knowledge within the department, but not shared, which means marketing will never really know what is happening in sales or in operations, and always the other way around with every single one of these. So what we have built is something where all the departments engage with each other, which means that scaling doesn't become, okay, yeah, that's just what operations do. But scaling becomes, okay, how can we figure out what operation can benefit marketing and sales? What marketing can make it easier for sales because marketing understands what problems there are right now in the closing process, and what operations can make both more efficient so that marketing can bring in the leads in the right way so that operations can scale perfectly without adding more operational bottleneck, and so on. You get the drill, right? Because now everything knows everything. Like everyone knows everything around every business. Whether that is also the tracking side of things. Let's say you've got salespeople and one person is completely outperforming. Usually what that means is you now have to sit down with them and you have to kind of figure out, okay, what are they doing differently? And once that person leaves, so does their performance. What we have now built, which you can see here at the very top, which is the most important part of it all, is the so-called context orbit. The context orbit works as a second brain, and we have built a so-called context orbit vault, which is one centralized brain. Let's say, for example, here this weirdly looking cloud is your context orbit vault. That is your context orbit, which means that this is now a centralized second brain that every single person, every single knowledge base, your entire company, whether it's legal, operations, departments, every single one of your employees, every single one of your departments goes into here, which now means that, okay, people understand what is happening with people. Back to the salesperson example, the centralized brain can now document exactly, okay, what have they been doing? How are they leading their calls? What strategy are they using? What are they saying differently compared to all the other salespeople? And now the analysis is not depending on if your salesperson can really put it into words what they're doing differently, but it starts being an analysis that you can pull from your brain. Besides that, we also got two different things that happen quite often. Whether it is, okay, you're scaling and you're trying to hire more team members. What do you have to do? You have to onboard them. Now, you might have a centralized program which they can go through, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Problem here is that, first of all, it takes hours to create that program yourself, because again, you now have to pull all the information from your team members and from yourself into a program. And then the second problem is that it basically stays generic as long as you don't update it, which means you have to now sit down and you have to update it over and over again to make sure that everyone who comes in is always up to date. That's problem number one. Number two, imagine someone leaves your company. What it usually means is that the knowledge leaves with them, which means that the next person still starts at the exact same knowledge without taking the learnings with them that the last person has learned already by making mistakes, which means you're just repeating the same processes over again. Now, what does a centralized second brain, a context orbit vault, the one that we have developed specifically, which, by the way, you can't find that on YouTube, LinkedIn, or ChatGPT or whatever, because this is actually a framework that we have developed now over months, and we've never given that specific one away. Now, anyways, what does this do? This is there to make sure that every single part of the knowledge is inside there, which means it knows exactly what your other employees are all doing, your best performing ones, your lower performing ones. It analyzes exactly what is the difference between them, which means if now someone onboards or is a new employee is being onboarded, you can go ahead and you can train them on the best practices that have been analyzed from your best employees. So they know exactly to this date, okay, what have they done those last few days in order to generate XYZ results, and they can be trained on exactly that and nothing else. And the same thing happens that if you offboard someone, their knowledge stays within here. So if then a few weeks later you replace their role with a new hire, they know exactly what the last person has been doing, so they can pick it up where they left it off. What that therefore now means is that your company becomes this connected, centralized infrastructure and ecosystem where everyone knows what is being done in each and every single department and can therefore work off of that knowledge without having to wait for any answers from any human being, because it all works through the context orbit. And you're going to see in just a second why that is so powerful. Now, what actually lives in such context orbit, again, and we've already talked about it, but I mean, this was maybe still a little bit abstract, so if you have any questions, always in the comments down below, just ask. But generally speaking, what lives in such context orbit is every single fundamental, whether it is your ICP, your office, your voice and copy rules. So who are you selling to? What are you selling to these people? How do you speak? How do you write? How do you run your businesses? How does your processes work? All the SOPs and so on. Every single step-by-step process is documented and lives inside this brain. Every single client context. Okay, who from your ICP have you already built this for? What have you built for them? How do you build it for them? So what is their voice? How are their copy rules? How do they speak? How do we have to run the projects for them? Which means now you're running an entire SOP on each and every single client on how to run that client. Which means you've now got the client context, whether that is old clients, new clients, case studies, and so on. Now, the most important part that can make this adaptable, which means it engages with new content and new knowledge, and it adapts, which means that context orbit, it never stays the same, but it goes hand in hand with your daily processes, and it saves everything that you're doing. From that, it can now learn exactly how do you make decisions, so it can start thinking and operating like you're building, and that is why it's called a second brain, because it's literally a copy of your business. Like you can literally go ahead and basically see it as, okay, this is your business, which by the way, your business, like this is your business, which means your business represents this. And this cloud is basically, this second brain is a representation of that business on a server that knows everything. The important part with this and the powerful part with this is what you can now do with this. Because it's cool that you've now got all your knowledge with here centralized and really very clean, right? Like if you just want to make sure that you've got every process in one place, this is your single source of truth. But the real progress now comes when we take a look at what we're now doing with that knowledge. Because now we go ahead and we take that context layer that knows your entire business, and we connect it with an operator. Now, an operator could, for example, be a system like Claude Code, a system that has access to all your tools, to all your technical tools, and can therefore now read all the processes and runbooks, all the client context, all the SOPs, everything inside here, and knows step by step, okay, I have access to the XYZ tool, which means I can now do XYZ. What that means, Claude Code, for example, it's an operator that now knows everything about your business, and you have to remember, because you are pulling all the information from every single department, every single person into that brain. This operator now knows more than any single given person in your entire company. Which means this becomes the new senior role inside your company for asking questions, taking care of operations, and really building the company up while you can focus on the stuff that you need to focus on as a founder. So you've got that operator layer that can utilize knowledge to do something. Now from there, you go ahead and you rebuild your company into engines, because those engines are then eventually those processes that the operator can use to execute on all your tasks. So let's take, for example, the stuff that is relevant to the delivery that we have, the products that we have for our clients. Let's start with the very first one, lead gen engine. How do we actually generate those leads for our clients? Especially if you're a lead gen agency, obviously that is the most important part. Let's take, for example, the whole principle of cold email, right? So we take a look at that and we see, okay, we need to get the lists. We need to verify, qualify the right leads. We need to set up the campaigns with the right copy, pull the leads into there with the right settings. And then once we start running, we have to monitor results and we have to handle replies. That is the entire lead gen engine. Now, how can it know all of that? Because it knows the ICP, it knows the office, whether it's ourselves or for our clients, and it knows the client context. And then plus that, it also knows the processes, which means it knows how to do every single one of these steps with the information given, which means it becomes a seamless process of doing something that you were already doing yourself, and it's doing the exact same thing that you were doing. Besides that, it can actually do it at the same time. It can take care of the lists, then qualify and verify, and then eventually go ahead and write the copy, set up the campaigns, and then upload the leads and everything at the same time, while you've been sitting there for hours doing every single thing step by step. Now next up, the copy engine. Same thing here. You've got voice and copy rules. You've got that for yourself and for every single client, which means it can now go ahead and write the copy engine in your voice for your ICP. Content engines, and that is the one that I've also shown a few weeks ago on my LinkedIn, where I have run this automation or this content engine that we've got here on Claude Code. And you can see here is Claude Code. Click yes, allow, and look here. It filled it with 18 posts, scored it by ICP fit, by the funnel type, by the topic, and so on. It has done everything for me because it knows exactly what channels do I run, how do I run them, how do I sound within them, who am I writing to, who is this actually for, who are we addressing, and then eventually also the best practices, what is actually working within content right now, how does the algorithm work, and so on. For example, it completely analyzed through what the new algorithm actually wants to see. The switch over from the 360 brew that we had, we are right now at 360 brew, that way around. Before that, we had the old algorithm, which was the easiest one in a long time, where you could just push out lead magnets and so on, and you get millions of views. However, then they've made the new update with 360 brew, which is an algorithm that is just so much more intelligent and sorts your content to the right audience fit by the relevancy of it, which means you can no longer push out bullshit. You have to post actual, real, high performing and high quality content. Now that was the content engine, and we've got that for LinkedIn, we've got that for newsletters, and we've got that for video. Newsletters, 3 times per week. I'm pushing out newsletters to over 1,700 people on our email list right now, the Inner Orbit, which you can also sign up using the sign up links on my website and on my LinkedIn. And then third of all, videos, stuff like this entire ideation, this entire graph, everything that I'm showing right here has been built and strategized and thought through by Claude Code. I am just now going ahead and recording because why? It knows everything that's happening. It knows exactly how I got my agency from 40 to 80%, which means it can now create the entire video. And I'm just here sitting, recording, and explaining because that is what I can do best. I'm not best at here creating perfectly orchestrated boxes and texts. I can't do that, or I don't want to do that because it's not worth my time. So it takes care of that so I can actually focus on the stuff that I want to do as a founder, which is recording the videos so that people get familiar with who I am as a person. And then the fourth engine that we're building right here, which is super important to be able to really track and optimize your metrics and everything that you're doing. We've got a reporting and COO engine, which means it analyzes exactly, okay, what are the different engines that we're using? What are the different processes that we have within the company? And what metrics are there that we need to track in order to endlessly improve them? That is the role of the COO, which means, in other words, that it's now starting to track those metrics and make decisions based on numbers, because it basically erases the human irrationality of just always trying to fix stuff based on feeling. And it starts doing that because it has the data to actually do it. So it makes data-backed decisions. And as a result of all these systems, think about it. You now got live campaigns that are being monitored, that are booking the calls for clients, because everything from the first lead scraping all the way to the reply handling are all taken care of. You've got the deliverables because all the content assets, authority assets, and reports are all being taken care of. So, which means that all of that deliverables, authority assets, reports, you name it, and then the weekly reporting. One of the number one things that I see as to why clients are leaving and why the churn rate is really high, because results can be great, But if your clients do not understand what is actually happening within the project because you don't give them enough updates, they will leave. Which means part of having higher profit margins is also being able to retain a high amount of clients throughout the entire collaboration. Which means if you can now take care of weekly reporting and you can send them a beautifully orchestrated and custom weekly reporting on their numbers, on everything that's happening within their business, they are going to stay and they're going to be happy that they did. Because they could go to a competitor that is generating them 1.5 amount the results, which again, like if you have this system set up properly, I doubt that anyone could do that. But even if, they could go to them, but they're choosing to stay with you. Why? Because they have not only perfect results through these engines, but now they also know exactly what is going on, and that overview is what is killing churn if you don't have it, and is going to minimize, like it's going to, or not killing churn, it's basically killing retention. What is actually killing churn is if you have that. So therefore, it's important that you actually focus on all of it. And with that, we already go into the next part to actually show you, okay, where do these numbers actually come from? Why did we even start doing all of this? Why did we even have these calculations? How did we go about the whole principle of realizing that scaling can't equal people, otherwise it's becoming inefficient, and that we have to have infrastructure? If you think about it, and those are basically approximately the hours that we had to put in for a new client. Let's say, okay, we onboard a new client. What now? We already spend a bunch of time on contracts, proposals, calls, the outreach, the analysis, and so on. Which means now, okay, we finally closed them. Cool. We've got the money in the bank account and so on. Now, onboarding call. 90 minutes, 1.5 hours on a call to figure out more about them, what they want, show them the process so they are being onboarded properly. Context ingestion. That is basically where they have to take care of the form. We have to make sure that we create the entire context around it so we can make sure to go ahead and then actually build a system around it, write the right copy and so on. Now we've got some forms flying around in the company that everyone kind of has to get access to via Slack or via, via Google Drive, you name it. And actually reviewing and sorting that stuff, minimum 2 hours at least. And by the way, those are kind of the minimum timeframes that we've got. Then the infrastructure build, 2.5 hours, like 2.5 hours is already pretty nicely put here, because a lot of times it was actually more. Because if you have to think about it, it's also not just the creating itself, but that endless communication between the platforms that is non-existent. Where you have to, for example, you have to set up the campaigns, then you have to export them, put them into Instantly, assign the mailboxes to every single one of them, name them, put in the names, put in the profile pictures, create the lead list, verify, qualify, download, upload, and do that multiple times, then sort them in Google Docs, and then eventually put that into the campaigns and so on, then writing the copy. Like this is most of the time was way more than 2.5 hours. I could probably put on double that. So let's say 2.5 hours for now. And then we've got the weekly management, right? So the campaigns are now live in week 2, which means we had 14 days of setup initially, which means they sign and 14 days long, we have to set everything up, which is okay. We set the expectation, but at the same time, clients would love to see the results on day 1. And that is also what's going to maximize your retention, to make sure that they get their first win as fast as possible. However, here 14 days have gone by and now you've got campaigns live. Cool, now you have to manage replies. Minimum 30 minutes to 1 hour a day per client. Because if you think about it, if you've got 40 replies, let's say half of that or 1/4 of that, which by the way are pretty good numbers, but we hit those, are positive replies. That means you're sitting anywhere between 10 to 20 people that you've got to reply to, that you've got to research, that you've got to book on appointments. And then also follow up from the ones before and so on. And now by the end of the week, of course, we want to do the reporting and the optimization so that clients are happy and they know exactly, okay, what are they actually doing with our campaigns right now, so they're not stepping in the dark, but they actually know, and okay, what are we actually spending our money on? Now, if we take the minimum, and again, like this is much more on our end, again, please, I urge you and I really advise you to calculate yourself how much time is actually going into this, because this gives you so much more awareness around what you're actually doing within your company. But let's say, for example, 7.5 hours per week, which means one entire working day goes straight out for a client. Now imagine we scale it up and we close 5 clients every single week. Take that by minimum 5. If not more, because with scale it becomes less efficient, which means you need more time for the same tasks. And then at the same time, it just becomes so much more. Now, if you have 5 clients and you have 5 working days that go into it, all of a sudden, an entire week of a person's time was just fed to processes that should never touch a human hand. And of course, you can delegate that to team members, but think about it. What could they do with their day if they wouldn't do this? Because if you think about it, the shift from the typical agency model to the infrastructure model, for our clients that we do this entire thing for, takes a few days, which means the amount of time that you're putting into 5 clients is the time that you would need in order to never, ever again have to spend so much time on each client while still seeing better results for each and every single one of them. And that is the bottleneck right here. So again, make sure you calculate that. Same as your profit margin, because if you start understanding how much profit do you actually make, how much time goes into it, then you start realizing how much impact it would actually have for you to run your service business on the infrastructure model rather than the typical model. And to be able to even do that in the first place. As always in business, and we all know it, sometimes you just like to skip steps, but it's very important that you go through this step by step, which is exactly why this process starts with context layer, then operator layer, then execution engine, and then delivery, not the other way around. Because again, here, tools don't create margin, context does. Which means if you now go ahead and you do not create the context within the context orbit, or you don't build something like that, which by the way, you can find stuff like that on YouTube. I will also in the future create a video on this. However, most of the time, the ones that are on YouTube, I wouldn't suggest those because they're pretty bad quality. Like, it's crazy. If you actually understand the model, if you actually understand the systems behind this, you understand that these are good for beginners, but they're going to hold you back from scaling. So if you want hours, you can just make sure to book a call with me or my team. We're going to take an exact look at what this context orbit should look like for your specific business. And of course, follow me on this channel, follow me on LinkedIn, because on there, I'm always giving advice on how to build this up the right way. But anyways, tools don't create margin, context does. So you have to have a context orbit, a business brain sitting at the top. And of course, the best one that is right now on the market. And I know this sounds cliche because it's our product, but we've just compared so many different systems and Obsidian brains and so on. They just can't keep track within Context Orbit Vault. And with an Obsidian brain, you will always have one brain that sits at one person. With an Obsidian brain or a normal second brain, you will never have that centralized framework for your entire company, because that is the exact USP of the business vault, the Context Orbit Vault, the business brain vault, is that it has everything. And every single employee, every single person in your company accesses the same brain. But anyways, so number one, systemize every single business process. Put everything that we've now talked about here in this first layer. Make sure that you've got single source of truth, that you connect it to your AI note takers, to your Google Drive, to wherever the most information lies, so it can start pulling that information and adapt based on it. You build the context, and now based on that, you figure out, okay, what operator works best. I mean, right now, it's pretty clear that it's Claude Code. I don't even want to start with the stuff that OpenAI is doing because, okay, maybe Codex and so on is not that bad, but I'm just not a fan of OpenAI in general, because Anthropic is really the partner that I would trust with my information, plus also that are just very streamlined and very straightforward. Plus they have the perfect connectors, they have the perfect integrations, and just also they're just so much more user-friendly. There's so much stuff out there that you can learn about Claude Code from Anthropic themselves through their program that you wouldn't have with OpenAI. Anyways, create context, put an operator on it, first 2 steps. And then once you've done that and you actually start creating the engines through your SOPs and runbooks, the third part is the one that is going to have all the impact, which is going step by step through your companies and deleting the handoffs. Seeing where are people right now delegated to tasks that should never even touch a human hand. And I've said it before, but this is what is killing your profit margin. So make sure that as soon as possible, once you have these engines in place, you delete the handoffs and you make sure that nobody is working on tasks that should not be done by a human. And that is the biggest impact. And that is also important that you therefore go step by step, because of course this is the most fancy thing here. This is the thing that people want to see, want to hear, want to do. So what are they going to do? They're going to install Claude Code and think, okay, cool, now I can delete all the handoffs. Congratulations, you've just completely killed your company, because the moment you don't have any centralized system that has no context, but you still fire all your people, you delete the handoffs, you delete the delegation, you're just at square one and your business falls apart, which means now you're in a stressful situation, because either you have to re-onboard them again, or you have to really quick build the systemization of your business, which is therefore not going to hold ground, because it's going to be not high quality, it's not going to be thought through if you're doing it in a hurry. Therefore, do it step by step. I can't stress this enough. It only takes a few days if you do it right, if you know how to do it. Most people don't. For example, we do that step by step with our clients so that they know exactly what to do. And therefore, that is, again, also what I'm saying here, because, again, it's like super important. Everything breaks if you don't do step one, because the AI sounds generic. If it doesn't know anything about your business, it doesn't matter how good of an operator you have, how good of strategization you have. It's going to sound like everyone else, because generally speaking, everyone uses the same AI. The only thing that differentiates yours from others is the context that you do, which means the order of this is the actual strategy. With that being said, long story short, this is exactly how we scaled our agency from 30, 40% to 80% profit margin within a few days by switching from the typical agency model to the infrastructure agency model. Now, if you want help from our team and myself to make sure that you can make that pivot with your service business, again, no matter if you're a consulting, coach, agency, doesn't matter, because this works for them all. We take on a handful of clients every single month for the consulting projects that we do in order for you to actually transition to that new model. Now, in order to do that, click on the link below. There's a booking link where you can book a call with me, put in a few answers to the questions on there, and then we're going to see if you are a fit to work with us on this together. And the entire goal, the entire incentive that we have with each and every single process is to transition you from a typical agency to the new infrastructure agency model by looking exactly at, okay, where does your current margin goes to, and how can we make sure that you represent that in an infrastructure that saves you all of those hundreds of thousands of euros if you calculate it out. Depending on where you are, that could be per month, that could be per year. It doesn't matter, it's still a lot of money that goes straight out of the window. And by the way, here you can, for example, also see the first 3 clients that we had in the very first few days of actually running this offer, because we flew out a bunch of guys, like 12 entrepreneurs, to Croatia for an in-person event. Entrepreneurs doing like anywhere between 50 to 800,000 euros a month. And we started building it up with those guys, and the results are already incredible. Once you book a call, you're also going to see it in a case study funnel, a little bit more about them. Okay, what are their stories? What has happened together with them during the time that we worked with them, and so on and so forth. Long story short, this was it for today. I hope it was helpful. Any questions, let me know in the comments down below, or send me a DM on LinkedIn. And on that note, I wish you a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.